I heard the shot before I even saw her fall. It was a sharp, unnatural crack that echoed across the empty school parking lot, the kind of sound you don't process as real until it's far too late. I remember the way the morning sun bounced off the concrete, the quiet flutter of leaves, the faint hum of tires in the distance, and then that sound, a single gunshot, followed by a scream that didn't even feel like it came from me, more like something primal was torn from my chest and thrown into the sky. My daughter, Emma, had just turned 10. She was in her favorite polka dot dress, with her hair tied in pink ribbons she had insisted on the night before. Her little wheelchair had these colorful stickers on the sides, stars and butterflies, all slightly faded. She had been so excited that morning. It was the first day back at school after spring break, and she couldn't wait to show her friends the hand-painted picture frame she had made over the weekend. I was standing no more than 20 feet away when it happened. Karen, the woman the HOA praised, feared, and enabled, stood on the walkway holding a silver revolver like it was an accessory to her morning routine. Calm, composed, like she was handing out parking tickets, not bullets. For a moment, time stopped. Emma's wheelchair jerked back violently. A red stain spread across her side like spilled ink on white canvas. The sound of the wheel scraping the pavement as she tilted and fell sideways will haunt me until my last breath. I rushed forward, stumbling, screaming, barely breathing. I dropped to my knees next to her, trying to hold her, press on the wound, call her name, but her little body just trembled. Blood pooled beneath her like a growing shadow. And Karen? She just stood there. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She didn't drop the weapon. She didn't even flinch when the sirens began wailing in the distance. With the same ice-cold poise, she walked over to me, heels clacking against the pavement like this was some goddamn boardroom meeting, and held out a folded piece of paper. I stared at it dumbfounded, still pressing my hands to Emma's side. Karen, with a voice as flat as a bank teller, said, "You'll need to reimburse the HOA for the ammunition. That bullet came out of our community budget." I remember blinking up at her, not even able to comprehend what I was hearing. My daughter was gasping, dying. The world had turned upside down. And this woman, this self-appointed enforcer of neighborhood order, was handing me a bill. A literal bill. 62 cents. That's what the paper said. HOA expense notification. Standard ammunition charge for incident response. Incident response? My little girl had been shot by a woman who once fined us for leaving a plastic Halloween pumpkin on our porch 2 days past the deadline. A woman who had filed over a dozen noise complaints against us, not for parties or music, but for Emma's wheelchair ramp being too loud when it unfolded. A woman who tried to ban my daughter from using the community pool because her presence made other children uncomfortable. And now this. My vision blurred. I couldn't tell if it was rage or tears or the blood that stained my hands. But I knew one thing with complete clarity. This wasn't just a moment of madness. This was the end of a long, calculated war. One that Karen had been waging from behind manicured lawns, pristine community rules, and smiling HOA newsletters. The ambulance arrived. The police came. They took statements. Karen was escorted away, but not in handcuffs. And I was left kneeling beside my daughter, who had once told me she wanted to grow up to be a teacher, who had just started learning to write cursive, who never hurt anyone. That morning, I lost everything. But this isn't just a story about grief. It's about power, about how unchecked authority in the wrong hands can destroy lives. It's about a system that stood by, no, empowered someone like Karen. And it's about how far a parent will go when the people who are supposed to protect us become the ones who pull the trigger. How did we get here? Let me take you back to where it all began. Emma wasn't just my daughter. She was the reason I kept breathing. She was born with cerebral palsy, and the doctors warned us early that she'd never walk. But what they didn't tell us was how brightly she'd shine in every other way. Emma had this infectious giggle, the kind that made strangers on the street stop and smile. Her eyes were a soft ocean blue, always wide with curiosity, always asking why. She loved painting, hated broccoli, and believed that mermaids were real and that they used wheelchairs underwater just like hers. When my wife left a year after Emma was born, overwhelmed by the pressure, I guess, I became a single dad overnight. I sold my car, took on 2 remote jobs, and moved from a downtown apartment to a quiet suburban neighborhood that claimed to be family friendly, inclusive, and safe. It had decent schools, smooth sidewalks, and what seemed like a blessing at the time, a strong homeowners association that promised order and harmony. It wasn't until the moving truck pulled up that I heard her name for the first time. Karen. Neighbors warned me with nervous smiles. She means well. Just don't leave your bins out too long, one said. Another whispered, she runs the HOA. Like, really runs it. At the time, I laughed it off. I didn't care about garden gnomes or mailbox heights. I just wanted Emma to have a safe place to grow. Our house was modest, painted sky blue with a small yard Emma adored. I spent an entire weekend building her a custom ramp, decorated with glow-in-the-dark stars. It wasn't fancy, just functional, made with love. But on the very first Monday after we moved in, I found a yellow notice taped to our door. Unauthorized modification. HOA approval required. Remove immediately. It was signed, of course, by Karen. I knocked on her door that evening, holding Emma's hand and hoping a civil conversation could clear things up. She opened the door in a beige pantsuit, clipboard already in hand. Her lips pursed into a permanent frown. You're the new resident, she said, not asked. Yes, I replied. My daughter needs the ramp for her wheelchair, and rules are rules, she cut in. There's a process. You submit a request. You wait for approval. Then you build. Emma coughed softly. Karen glanced down at her, then quickly looked away, like eye contact with a disabled child might stain her. It's a safety issue, I said, trying to stay calm. Safety starts with order, she snapped. That's what keeps this community clean and livable. That word, clean, felt sharp, like we were dirt in her perfect little world. Still, I played along. I submitted forms. I attended HOA meetings. I answered her condescending emails. But it didn't matter. Once Karen had marked us, we were always under scrutiny. Emma's wheelchair tires left faint black marks on the sidewalk. We got fined. I installed solar lights on the ramp for visibility. Fined. She played music, soft lullabies from her room window. We got a noise violation. The worst part? Emma noticed. She once asked, Daddy, does Miss Karen not like me? I froze. How do you tell a child that someone hates her just for existing? I tried to shield her, to keep things light. I said Karen was just a grown-up who forgets how to smile. But the truth was, Karen had made it her mission to push us out or break us down. At school, things were better, at least in the beginning. The staff adored Emma. She made friends easily. But Karen, as I would soon learn, sat on the school's parent committee. It wasn't long before subtle changes crept in there too. Emma was no longer selected for class performances. Her ramp access was suddenly under maintenance during events. Teachers stopped making eye contact when I dropped her off. And then the most absurd complaint of all, Karen claimed my daughter's wheelchair scared the younger students. She pushed for Emma to be placed in a special accommodations area away from a main hallway, basically out of sight, like she was some kind of health hazard. I was furious. I wrote letters. I called the school board. But Karen's influence ran deep. The HOA, the school, even some neighbors, they all seemed afraid of her. Behind her perfectly trimmed hedges and pastel sweaters, Karen wielded real power. Not legal power, but something worse, social control. The kind that makes decent people stay silent. The kind that turns smiles into whispers. The kind that teaches children like Emma they're a problem to be managed. The tension kept rising, small moments that felt like paper cuts until one day you realize you're bleeding out. I didn't know it then, but we were on a slow road to disaster. And every warning sign was there, in her tone, in her letters, in her eyes. But I was too focused on keeping Emma safe and loved to see the full picture. I never imagined that the same woman who once fined us for painting flowers on the sidewalk would one day pull a gun on my child. But the seeds had already been planted. and soon they would bloom into something unthinkable. It started with a parking ticket. I parked my car just outside our house for 5 minutes, long enough to carry Emma inside and grab her backpack. When I came back, there was a bright orange HOA violation slip on my windshield. Unauthorized street parking. Violate section 3B.2. Never mind that the space wasn't marked. Never mind that no one else had ever gotten ticketed for the same thing. It was me. Us. Again. The next day, a warning letter arrived about our mailbox. Off-white instead of HOA standard white. Then one about excessive wind chimes, referring to the tiny pair Emma had hung on her window, the kind that barely made a sound unless a hurricane blew through. It was like living in a minefield. Every week, something new. Every knock at the door felt like another passive-aggressive attack. And always, it was Karen's signature at the bottom. I thought maybe it was just me, that maybe I was paranoid. But then the neighbors started acting differently too. People who used to wave at us began averting their eyes. A woman Emma had once played chalk games with stopped letting her kids near our yard. One evening, I overheard two men talking as they walked past. They should have never moved in. It's not good for resale value. We weren't good for resale value. The HOA had turned my daughter into a liability. But things really spiraled when Emma started getting excluded at school. It was subtle at first. She wasn't picked for group projects. Teachers forgot to send her birthday invitations that every other kid received. The straw that broke something inside me came during the school's spring talent show. Emma had spent weeks painting a large canvas she could unveil on stage, a sunflower scene inspired by Van Gogh. She practiced rolling up to it, narrating each part with her sweet, careful voice. The night before the show, we got a call. "I'm sorry, Mr. Collins, but due to stage access concerns, Emma will not be able to participate this year." Stage access concerns? The same ramp she'd used all year? It was a lie. I knew it, and I knew exactly who was behind it. Karen. I confronted the principal the next morning. He looked tired, defeated. She's been making noise about safety violations, district liability. She even mentioned litigation. I'm sorry. My hands are tied. That phrase stuck in my head. Tied hands, because that's how I was beginning to feel too. Bound. Silenced. Cornered. Emma tried to be strong. She said, "It's okay, Daddy. Maybe next year." But her smile didn't reach her eyes that time. And still, somehow, things got worse. A few days later, our security camera caught something that made my blood run cold. Karen, in broad daylight, walked up our ramp, bent down, and placed a small orange sticker on the railing. It read, "To be removed by order of HOA Compliance Division." She had no authority to do that. The ramp had already been approved after months of fighting and paperwork. But there she was, asserting herself like she owned the entire street. I took the footage to the HOA, filed a complaint. A week later, I received a formal notice. In light of your repeated and uncooperative behavior, you are hereby fined $200 for threatening a board member and falsifying complaints. Falsifying? Threatening? I felt like I was losing my mind. That night, I sat on the porch and watched Emma draw stars in her notebook. She had a dream of becoming an illustrator someday. She wanted to make books for kids who roll like me, she once said. And as I watched her, I realized something that chilled me to the core. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was erasing us. One penalty, one complaint, one lie at a time. And no one was stopping her. Even the local police seemed reluctant to get involved. I filed noise harassment reports, trespassing claims, even showed them the video. They nodded, took notes, and did nothing. Why? Because Karen didn't just sit on the HOA. She was the HOA. She'd been president for 9 years, re-elected every time without opposition. She wrote the meeting minutes, controlled the budgets, reviewed complaints, including the ones against her. And she had friends in high places. City council members, real estate agents, even a cousin on the local sheriff's staff. She was untouchable, and she knew it. Once, at an HOA meeting, I brought up Emma's repeated exclusion from events. I was calm, respectful. I even brought a folder with documentation, dates, emails, photos. Karen interrupted halfway through. Perhaps this neighborhood isn't the best fit for your family. No one said a word. Not one board member objected. That was the moment I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't miscommunication. This was war. And Karen wasn't just targeting me, she was targeting my child. A 10-year-old in a wheelchair. She saw Emma as disorder, as a disruption to the pristine plastic version of reality she curated with her flower beds and property codes. The final warning came on a Monday. I found a typed note in our mailbox and signed "No return address." It read, "Accidents happen. Maybe if you left quietly, your daughter would be safe." I took it to the police. They shrugged. Hard to trace. Could have come from anyone. Could have come from anyone? No. I knew exactly who sent it. And as much as I wanted to believe this nightmare couldn't get worse, that the hate would remain verbal, passive, legal, I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was coming. Something irreversible. And I was right. I just didn't know how fast it would arrive or how much it would cost. There's a specific kind of helplessness that hits you when you realize the systems designed to protect you were never built for people like you in the first place. The day after I reported the anonymous threat, Emma was pulled out of class. Not by her teacher, not by the nurse, by Karen. She entered the school with her usual smug authority, showed a piece of paper to the front desk, something official looking, and rolled Emma out of class without notifying me. When I arrived that afternoon, the staff was visibly shaken, like they knew something was off but couldn't say a word. I found Emma in a corner of the principal's office, clutching her sketchbook tightly to her chest. "Daddy, I didn't do anything wrong, did I?" I kneeled next to her, heart pounding. "Of course not, sweetheart. What happened?" Miss Karen said I was scaring the other kids. She told me I shouldn't be in a regular classroom anymore. I felt my body stiffen with rage. Karen, not a doctor, not a school employee, had taken it upon herself to remove my daughter from her class and humiliate her. And the school let her. I stormed into the principal's office, demanded answers, demanded accountability, but all I got was more of the same. "She's technically allowed on campus as a school board volunteer," he muttered. We can't stop her unless she poses a threat." Poses a threat? Karen had just abducted a disabled child from her classroom and called it volunteering. I contacted a lawyer. I tried going to the district board. I called the media, but the story didn't catch fire, not right away. It was just another case of a parent overreacting. Another messy neighbor dispute. Another overlooked abuse buried under red tape and official smiles. And then came the fine. Yes, the fine. 2 days later, I received an envelope from the HOA. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a photo of Emma's wheelchair ramp. Same ramp as always, but this time with a red circle drawn around a small crack on the side. Violation, unsafe modification. Structure must be removed within 7 days. Fine, $500. They were fining me for a hairline crack in the ramp that Emma depended on to enter her home. That was the day I lost it. I sent Karen an email, blunt, furious, and filled with truth. "You're not enforcing order. You're enforcing cruelty. And you will not destroy my daughter." She replied with just 4 words. "Prove it in court, and maybe I would have if she hadn't made her next move first." That weekend, as Emma and I returned from grocery shopping, we found a group of neighbors standing on our front lawn. Not to protest, not to support. They were watching, waiting. 2 HOA board members stood by as a private contractor began dismantling the ramp. I ran to stop him. "This is illegal." I shouted, "This is my property." One of the board members handed me a document. "We're exercising emergency HOA compliance authority under Section 9. There is no Section 9. I snapped. The man shrugged. Karen added it in the last amendment. That night, I had to carry Emma up the stairs in my arms. She looked up at me and whispered, "Did I do something wrong again?" I choked back tears and said no, that this was just a misunderstanding, that things would get better. But I was lying. They weren't getting better. They were accelerating. 3 days later, I was served a court summons. Karen was suing me for harassment, defamation, and emotional distress. Her evidence? My email security footage of me yelling in my own driveway and testimonies from a few neighbors who claimed I was aggressive and unstable. The same week, Emma was officially removed from her art class. Due to resource limitations, the school said all of this while Karen walked around like a queen in a kingdom she created, untouchable, unchecked, and worse, unrepentant. But the final blow came not from the HOA, not from a court, not even from the school. It came from Emma herself. She stopped painting. She stopped singing. She stopped asking questions. She just sat by the window most days, sketchbook closed, eyes dull, voice quiet. The spark that made her special, that glowing, fierce light, was dimming. Because of them. Because of her. And I couldn't take it anymore. I gathered every document, every fine, every video. I created a folder called Karen's Reign. I sent it to every journalist I could find, every advocacy group, every disability rights organization. I posted on forums, on Reddit. I wrote the full story on Facebook. At first, silence. Then a ripple. A lawyer from out of state reached out, said he'd help me pro bono. A former neighbor shared a story of how Karen drove their son out of the neighborhood after accusing him of gang behavior for wearing a hoodie. Then a mother from 3 streets overshared that her autistic son had once been photographed by Karen for suspicious behavior while picking flowers. The dam was cracking. The story finally hit a local blog, then a news segment, then a viral tweet. Suddenly, people cared. Suddenly, Karen wasn't just a petty tyrant, she was national news. But none of it mattered to me, because I knew what she was capable of. I knew she wouldn't go down quietly. And that's when I started getting calls. Blocked numbers, heavy breathing, silence, then threats. Your daughter's already broken. Might as well finish the job. I reported it. Again. The police opened a file. Again. But no arrests. No action. No protection. I begged for a restraining order. I was denied. Insufficient, immediate risk, they said. And 3 days later, she shot my daughter. In front of the school. And handed me a bill. It was Tuesday. Bright. Breezy. Birds chirping like nothing was wrong with the world. Emma had a school presentation that morning. She'd spent the whole weekend working on it, a small diorama of her dream planet made from colored cardboard, glitter, and love. It was the first time in weeks I'd seen her excited again. She even hummed while brushing her hair, something she hadn't done since Karen had her art class canceled. We left early. She wanted to be the first one in. Said she wanted to set up her project just right. I lifted her into the van, tucked her sketchbook beside her, and fastened the seatbelt across her lap. She looked up at me and smiled. Do you think the kids will like my stars? They're going to love them. I said, and I meant it. We arrived at school a little after 7:30 a.m. The parking lot was mostly empty, just a few staff cars and a maintenance truck near the gym. I pulled up to the front entrance and stepped out to help Emma down the ramp. That's when I saw her, Karen, standing at the foot of the walkway, arms folded, lips tight, gun in hand. Not a concealed weapon, not something hidden. She was holding a silver revolver, openly, brazenly, as if it were part of her outfit. Her expression wasn't angry. It wasn't panicked. It was calm, controlled, deadly. I froze. The kind of freeze your body does before it even knows what danger you're in. I looked around, hoping someone else had seen her, hoping there were witnesses, hoping this was a nightmare I hadn't woken up from. Emma giggled behind me, not seeing Karen yet. Did I beat the bell? Stay in the van, I whispered, but she was already unfastening her seatbelt, eager, unaware. I turned back to Karen. What are you doing? I shouted. Put that down. She didn't speak, didn't flinch, just slowly raised the gun. And then the shot. It rang out like a crack in the universe. One sound, 1 second. Emma's body jolted in her chair. She let out a sharp, tiny gasp, more surprise than pain, and then collapsed sideways as her chair tilted and slammed against the curb. I screamed her name and sprinted. My hands were shaking. My knees buckled as I reached her. Blood, bright red, spreading fast from her left side. Her eyes were still open, barely flickering with confusion and fear. "Daddy," she whispered, "did I do something wrong?" I pressed my hands over the wound. "No, baby. No, no, no. You did nothing wrong. You're perfect. Just stay with me." The smell of gunpowder and blood clashed in the air. I couldn't even cry. My body was too busy trying to keep her alive. And then, footsteps. Karen approached like she was delivering a complaint about overgrown grass. She looked down at us, at Emma, and then reached into her purse. I thought maybe she was grabbing her phone. Maybe. For a second, a part of me still hoped she'd realized what she'd done. But no. She pulled out a folded piece of paper, set it gently on the sidewalk next to me. "As acting HOA enforcement officer, I'm obligated to notify you that the ammunition used today is community property. You'll be billed accordingly." That was all she said. Then she turned and walked away. No panic, no fear, no guilt. She shot a 10-year-old girl and handed her father a bill. When the sirens arrived, I was still holding Emma, covered in her blood, begging her to breathe. Officers surrounded us. Paramedics rushed in. A reporter's van pulled into the lot minutes later. Someone must have called the local news. And Karen? She stood calmly near her car, chatting on the phone. They didn't tackle her. They didn't cuff her. They didn't even raise their voices. They asked her questions, polite procedural questions, as if this was just a formality. I was still screaming my daughter's name, still trying to keep her here, still trying to understand how any of this was real. Hospitals have a way of turning time into a fog. Beeping machines, hushed voices, and the sterile scent of disinfectant become your new reality. You forget what day it is. You forget to eat. You forget who you were before you became the parent of a child fighting to stay alive. Emma was rushed into surgery within minutes of arrival. The bullet had shattered 2 ribs and punctured her left lung. The doctor said the shot missed her heart by less than an inch, a miracle they called it. I didn't feel miraculous. I felt hollow, like something sacred had been stolen from us. I sat in that cold waiting room for 6 hours, knees bouncing, eyes fixed on the swinging double doors. No one from the police came to update me. No social worker. No detective. Just silence, as if the system was waiting to see if Emma would live or die before deciding how much they cared. Eventually, a young nurse with tired eyes walked out and gave me a small smile. "She's stable. She's asking for you." I don't remember walking down the hall, just the sound of my footsteps echoing, each one heavier than the last. When I saw her, I stopped breathing. She was so small in that bed, tubes in her arms, oxygen mask strapped across her face, heart monitor blinking like a faint signal from another world. Her eyes opened slowly, and when they met mine, she gave the tiniest nod. "Daddy, I'm here," I whispered, rushing to her side. "I'm here. You're okay." But she wasn't okay. None of this was. A police officer finally arrived an hour later. He didn't sit, didn't offer condolences, just read from a small notebook, like he was taking an incident report on a stolen bicycle. "We're investigating the discharge of a legally owned firearm by a registered resident. The shooter claims it was accidental." Accidental. I exploded. She aimed at a child. My daughter was unarmed. She wasn't even moving toward her. "We understand. But Mrs. Weaver, don't call her that," I snapped. "Her name is Karen." He cleared his throat awkwardly. "Miss Weaver claims she believed a threat was imminent due to previous altercations and online harassment. She also stated she felt physically endangered by a 10-year-old girl in a wheelchair." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Is she in custody?" I asked. "No, sir. Not at this time. There's no flight risk, and she hasn't violated any bail conditions." Bail? She posted bail? That quickly? She was processed and released within the hour. Clean record, community leader, judge approved a PR bond. I felt like the floor beneath me cracked open. Karen was free, out there, probably sipping tea on her porch, maybe watching the news, maybe smiling. The officer left a card and told me to stay hopeful. I nearly tore it in half. 2 days later, while Emma slept, I returned home for the first time to grab clothes, charge my phone, and collect mail. The front door had been taped with a notice, pending HOA disciplinary hearing. Property under review. Inside the mailbox was a small, white envelope, no return address. Inside it, folded neatly, was a bill. Community expenditure reimbursement, ammunition used during HOA enforcement. Amount due, 62 cents. There was no explanation, no apology, just a line that read, "Failure to pay may result in lien action against property." I sat on the floor of my hallway, surrounded by silence, and laughed. I laughed like someone who had completely snapped. Because how do you even process that? Your daughter is clinging to life in a hospital bed, and the woman who shot her sends you an invoice? But the real twist wasn't the bill. It was what came next. The story went viral, but not in the way I expected. At first, people online weren't sure it was real. A few headlines picked it up. HOA gun incident leaves child hospitalized, neutral, sanitized language. Then came the spin. Karen gave an exclusive interview to a local news station. Sitting on her floral couch, with pearl earrings and crocodile tears, she said, "I feared for my life. That family harassed me for months. I was enforcing community policy when I was suddenly confronted. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, but I wasn't going to be a victim." And suddenly she was the victim. Fox News ran the story as a Second Amendment rights case. A conservative podcast dubbed her the suburban stand your ground hero. A GoFundMe was launched in her name, and it raised over $80,000 in 2 days. Meanwhile, I was drowning in medical bills. People sent death threats to my email, accused me of using my daughter's condition for sympathy, said I was playing the victim card. It was like being punched in the face and then watching the world hand your attacker a trophy. But something else was happening too. Quietly. On Reddit. On TikTok. On Instagram. Real people, angry people started digging. They found other HOA complaints signed by Karen, dozens of them, targeting minorities, elderly, single moms, kids with disabilities. They found her Facebook posts, rants about keeping the neighborhood pure, about declining standards, about outsiders. The house of cards was starting to shake. One night, I got a message from a young woman. "She made my mom lose her home. She's dangerous. Don't stop." Another from a former HOA board member. "Karen rewrote bylaws without a vote. She threatened people. I quit after she tried to ban a service dog from the park." That's when I knew we had something bigger than a lawsuit. We had a movement. But even as the internet rallied, as news outlets began to change their tone, as donations trickled in to support Emma's recovery, I still sat in that hospital room every night, watching her sleep, wondering if the light in her would ever come back. Karen may have walked free from a courthouse, but I knew something she didn't. She had declared war on a father. And fathers don't stop. Not when their children bleed. Not when the system fails. And especially not when someone tries to silence the very heart of their world. The truth doesn't always roar its way to the surface. Sometimes it rises slowly, whispered at first, doubted, dismissed, until it becomes too loud to ignore. That's how it started, with whispers. A Reddit thread titled HOA Nightmare. My disabled daughter was shot by the HOA president. Then I got billed for the bullet, gained traction. At first, I thought it would die like the others, but someone reposted it to r/justice served, then to r/entitled people, then to a Facebook group for disability rights, and then something shifted. The internet caught fire. Comments poured in by the thousands, stories from people across the country who had faced the wrath of HOAs, of Karen types with too much power and too little empathy. But this story was different because it had blood on it. It had a child. It had a bill. That 62-cent invoice became a symbol, a meme, a movement. People started tagging journalists, disability advocates, veterans, even celebrities. By the time Emma came out of her second surgery, #JusticeForEmma was trending on Twitter in 5 countries. A famous children's author shared her story. A disability rights organization launched a full investigation into Emma's school. And I finally had a voice again. I hired a civil rights attorney, a former prosecutor turned advocate, who took one look at the evidence and said, "This isn't just a lawsuit. This is a reckoning." We filed 3 suits simultaneously: a civil suit against Karen for personal damages and assault, a lawsuit against the HOA for complicity, negligence, and hostile housing practices, and a Title II ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, complaint against the school district. The legal documents were published online, and the media finally came knocking, the right media, not the ones who painted Karen as a defenseless old woman, but the ones who dug deeper, the ones who uncovered the HOA's ugly truth. Turns out, Karen had been running the association like a personal fiefdom for years. She'd rewritten bylaws without proper votes, imposed fines selectively, and bullied residents into silence with legal threats and fake policies. A whistleblower came forward, a former treasurer, who admitted that Karen had funneled HOA funds into private enforcement patrols and off-the-book security measures, including the firearm she used the day she shot Emma. And that was the thread that unraveled everything. Local news stations replayed the surveillance footage on a loop: Emma's body jerking in her chair, my screams, Karen handing over the bill. Public opinion turned fast and hard. The GoFundMe created for Karen? Shut down by the platform. The school principal? Placed on immediate leave. Karen herself? Finally arrested, this time with handcuffs. The charges were updated: aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, child endangerment, and federal civil rights violations. But justice wasn't just about watching her fall. It was about lifting Emma back up. Thanks to the viral momentum, donations poured in, not just money but gifts, books, paintings, handmade cards. Schools from across the country sent videos of children holding signs that read, "Emma, we believe in you. You matter. Shine on, Star Girl." I showed the videos to Emma one night. Her eyes, tired from recovery, lit up for the first time in weeks. "Are they really for me?" she asked softly. "Every single one," I whispered. And that spark I thought we'd lost? It flickered again. One day, she picked up her pencil, just stared at the blank page for a while. Then she began to draw. Her first sketch after the shooting was of a girl in a wheelchair flying through a galaxy of stars, shooting beams of light from her fingertips. I couldn't stop crying, because that was her, still shining, still fighting, still reaching for the sky. The lawsuits took months. Legal battles always do. Karen tried to play victim, claimed trauma, cited threats, blamed cancel culture. But the facts didn't care. The footage, the testimonies, the lies, the bill. The judge didn't just rule in our favor. He called her actions an egregious abuse of power and a textbook case of systemic discrimination weaponized through bureaucracy. Karen was sentenced to 12 years without parole. The HOA was dissolved. Its remaining funds, over $400,000, were redirected to a new nonprofit foundation. Emma's Light focused on supporting disabled children facing housing discrimination. The school board issued a public apology and created a new policy requiring ADA compliance training for all staff, board members, and volunteers. And Emma? She became the face of something bigger than herself. Not by choice, not because she wanted attention, but because sometimes light leaks through the cracks in the world and shines on those who deserve it most. She's walking again now. Not literally, her legs still don't work that way, but walking in the metaphorical sense. She paints, she writes, she smiles again, and she tells people what happened, because she wants them to know that even when evil wears a cardigan and smiles from behind HOA letters, it can still be stopped. You just have to fight back. You have to stand, even if it's from a wheelchair. Especially then. Because strength isn't how loud you yell. It's how long you refuse to stay silent. Some nights, I still hear the gunshot. Not because I haven't healed, but because some wounds aren't meant to close completely. They stay open just wide enough to remind you what matters. What's worth protecting? What silence can cost? Emma's scar runs across her ribs now, a quiet reminder of a war she never asked to fight. And yet she won. Not in the courtroom, though justice was served. Not in the media, though the world finally saw what had happened. She won because she chose to live, not just to breathe, to live, to laugh again, to draw again, to look people in the eye and say, I matter. She doesn't talk much about Karen anymore. And I don't push. Sometimes healing means leaving things buried where they fell. Sometimes it means using them as soil to grow something stronger. Our house looks different now. The ramp is new, sleek, safe, and covered in glow-in-the-dark stars again. Emma chose each one. There's no HOA here. No neighborhood tyrant. Just peace. And that peace? It was earned, not given. Emma started painting again last fall. Her first gallery showing was held in a local library, a quiet room filled with laughter, music, and kids rolling through in wheelchairs with wide, curious eyes. She titled the collection Light in the War Zone. One of the paintings had no title. It showed a girl, not in a chair, not on a street, but on a throne made of stars. She had a scar down her side and a crown made of fireflies. When I asked what it meant, Emma simply said, "It's what happens when they try to bury you and you bloom anyway." I looked around the room that day, strangers smiling, kids clapping, parents crying, and I realized something. We hadn't just survived Karen. We had shattered the idea that silence is safer, that disability should mean invisibility, that bullies in positions of power are untouchable. Not anymore. People still write to us. Survivors of HOA abuse, disabled teens facing stigma, parents who finally feel seen. And we answer them not with advice, but with our story. Because stories, real stories, can change laws, hearts, and futures. If you're still watching this, thank you. You've walked with us through fire. You've sat in the courtroom. You've felt the bullets that don't come from guns, the ones made of words, systems, and silence. And now you know. You know what it costs to live in a world where power protects itself and what it takes to rise anyway. So, what can you do? You speak. You stand. You don't look away. Not when you see injustice. Not when you hear a voice cracking from fear. Not when you pass someone like Emma, brave, quiet, and full of light, and realize she was never the problem. She was the proof that humanity, even in its smallest form, can be powerful. That love, even when wounded, can be louder than hate. That one father, one daughter, and 62 cents can start a war that ends with healing. So, to the Karens of the world, we see now. To the Emmas, keep shining. And to anyone who's ever been told to stay quiet, let this be your reminder. The loudest voice isn't the one that yells. It's the one that never gives up. If this story moved you, if you've ever faced injustice, been silenced, or watched someone you love be targeted just for existing, then don't let this be the end. Backhand Index Pointing Right subscribe to the HOA Stories, where we expose real abuses of power, share the voices of the unheard, and fight for those who can't always fight for themselves. Movie Camera, every story we tell is based on true events. Speech Balloon, every comment you leave is a stand against silence. Repeat Button, every share helps others realize they're not alone. Your voice matters. Emma's voice matters. And your story could be next. Envelope with Arrow got a story? Drop it in the comments or email us. We read everything. This isn't just a channel. This is a movement. This is the HOA Stories.